Hello. I'm going to give Instagram about 30 seconds to let my followers know that I'm live. Just got off our Champagne Society virtual event talking mental health and the COVID-19 juggle with Not Safe for Mom group and Motherhood Understood, the mothers behind those two communities. It was awesome. I really think that gathering with other women and normalizing what we're all feeling is medicine right now. And something came up during that call that I touched on that I want to do a video about. So I'm just going to do it here and you can watch it whatever. But it was this concept that I mentioned during that call of mothering yourself. And I was talking about how because the baseline for mental health has gotten so dramatically more lower, higher, everybody's mental health is hanging by a thread in times of crisis. Hi, Kane. Hi, Amy. Because everybody's in fight or flight. Everybody's, experiencing this similarly, no matter how different your situation is, that it's kind of an opportunity for us to learn to mother ourselves. Because even if you have a therapist that you're seeing once a week, which I hope you do, or a coach, like I'm doing weekly mama coaching circles for my community that you can register for, and that's great. But I have found that moment to moment, you might need support. And you're going to have like some great days where you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then you're just going to have some bad moments. And that is normal, right? Because crisis time. And so on this call, I was saying something about how now is the time to learn and use the strategy of mothering yourself. And then I realized, oh, wow, you can't just drop something like that and people don't know what that means or how to do it. And that is something that I work on with my clients and have worked really hard on with myself. And so I wanted to share a personal story to help you understand what this means that I have not shared before. So when I was pregnant with my second child, that was 2013-ish, I think, I got into a very big fight with my mother. And we kind of have a tumultuous history. And we've both worked really hard to have a relationship that is based on mutual respect now, but it was not always that way. And something had happened in my nuclear family with my mother at the time that I was pregnant that rocked her. And she did what she has always done in our relationship, which is she threw the hot potato. And I used to talk about this a lot, this idea of like when you are in pain or suffering and you don't know what to do with that, and so you throw a hot potato at somebody else. Like, I don't want to hold that, you hold it. And so she did this to me about a certain scenario that for privacy, I won't go into. And she threw a hot potato at me and I was pregnant. And despite the fact that I have worked on my reaction time of catching this hot potato for years of therapy and coaching in this particular relationship with my mother, I caught this hot potato that she threw in this one instance when I was pregnant, and she was triggered by something going wrong in her nuclear family. And we ended up having this phone conversation where she was blaming me and accusing me of being responsible for a certain suffering that was happening in her life. And I was hysterically crying and screaming back at her that it was not my fault and I had nothing to do with this thing that she was accusing me of, and that it wasn't fair that she was putting this on me. And as this was happening, I was acutely aware of my hormones. My pregnancy hormones were like raging, and I could totally tell that I was reacting in a way that I normally wouldn't if I was not pregnant. And if you've been pregnant, or postpartum, then you understand this phenomenon. Especially the first time, it kind of, you just are like, what is this? Who am I? Is this who I am forever? And then when you've been pregnant multiple times, you start to realize, no, this is pregnant me. This is what hormones feels like. It's kind of like when you're on your period and you're like, oh, this is what it feels like when I'm on my period. It's not how I normally am. So my response was like very dramatic and exaggerated because of those pregnancy hormones. And I felt very intense feelings to her accusation. And we got off the phone, and I was like inconsolable when this happened. I was crying so hard, and I was so upset. It kind of brings up emotion in me to remember this, because I remember it so vividly, that my husband had just walked in the door and he came running through the house screaming, "What happened? Are you okay?" And I was like in the fetal position on the floor, hysterically crying about this thing that my mom had accused me of. And he kept trying to calm me down, and he could not. I was inconsolable. And that's because she had triggered what they call the mother wound. She had triggered this mother wound, which is that if you have this, if you have a great relationship with your mom that's based on trust and love and understanding and respect, then you won't know what this is. And if you don't, you will know what this is. And that is when there's that thing between you and a person that you love, which is wound. There's a wound, and you don't feel maybe seen or loved unconditionally or understood by your mother. And again, I hesitate to even share stories like this because I really love and respect my mom so much. But I have to go into this to really understand this process that I'm going to share with you of mothering yourself, because this is a perfect scenario of when to use it. And in this moment, I was in crisis, much like a lot of people are right now during, the time of Corona. People are feeling really triggered and in fight or flight crisis mode. Hi, Kim. And so when my husband, I was like, just go away. I just need a minute. And I lay there in the fetal position of the floor of my room, crying. And because I've done so much work, I've been in and out of therapy for 10 years. I've had my own coaches for 5 years. I have done this work. I know what it feels like, what it looks like. I, thank God, asked myself in that moment, what is the thought? What is the thought that I am thinking very deep in my subconscious right now that is making this mother wound feel so painful? And the thought was, you're not a good person. The thought that was triggered was a belief about myself that I developed long time ago when I was younger, much younger, in my relationship with my mother, which I'm sure she had no intention of making me feel this way, but this is what my young little one created to understand how to operate in the world in a safe way, to belong and not piss off anybody and not have a situation like we were having in that moment. It was, I'm not a good person, so I better do X, Y, and Z. I am not a good person, so I better, overcompensate by being super obedient. I better overcompensate by being responsible for all those around me, especially my siblings, in the chat box if you know what I'm talking about. And so in that moment, when I was on the floor crying inconsolably, and I asked myself, what is the thought? It was like, I am not a good person. And that hurts. That sucks to have that, to feel that on a visceral level and know beyond a shadow of a doubt that is the thing that is causing you pain. It's not necessarily like what my mom said. It's not anything. It's this thought that has lodged in my brain that is coming out in emotion, right? So because I had worked on this process again, and I'm trying to tell you so that you can do it for yourself, I was like, time to mother myself. Because the thought is, I'm not a good person. And the person who could heal this mother wound is my mother. My mother could, in a fairy tale, pick me up, come over, hold me in her arms, stroke my head. You are good. You are good. You are good. But I didn't get that growing up. It's fine. It's made me who I am, and I'm really grateful for the resilience that it gave me. But it's the only thing that would probably heal that in that moment. And so I recognized I need to mother myself in this moment. And so I literally sat on the floor like this. I know this might sound a little extreme, but this is what I did. And this is like the best example I can give you of mothering yourself. Like holding myself, rocking myself, and telling myself all the things that I needed to hear from my mother in that moment. I remember saying things like, you are good. You are a good person. You love your family. You do everything you possibly can to keep your family together. It's not your responsibility. Like, you're doing the best you can. You're a good person. You're a good person. You're a good person. And then, oftentimes when I'm walking a client through this, I'll say, like, put one hand on your heart and one hand on your belly and like close your eyes and like really feel it, right? Like in your heart, like if you have been in this situation, you know what this feels like. And it is a deep, deep, visceral wound in your body that you can only heal by mothering yourself. Kim, not extreme at all. Hi, Kim, I miss you. And so giving yourself the medicine that you want the most badly to receive from your mother in that moment is called mothering yourself. And anybody can do this at any time for free. And that is why I reference it often. And then I realize that's not fair because a lot of people are like, what the F are you talking about? And so whatever it is that is triggering you, I mean, if you're having a good day, just tuck that in your pocket. But if you ever find yourself in a real triggered moment where you realize you've just caught somebody else's hot potato and an old wound has been, it's like sticking a knife in an old wound, right? And it's bleeding and it really hurts and you're inconsolable. I would encourage you to ask yourself, what is the thought? What am I thinking about myself that is making this hurt so, so badly? What do I most need to hear in this moment? If I was a mom with a small child, like what would I tell them? You have to literally put your hand on your heart, close your eyes, and say those words to yourself and mean them. Don't think about like this is cheesy or this is woo. Like if you actually take this practice seriously and gift this to yourself, it is the only thing that's going to heal it. Because you can numb out like a lot of us do, which no judgment, or you can project and throw a hot potato back at your mom and, try to like lessen your pain and blame by putting that back on her. Or you could misplace it and put it on your partner and make it about something that they've done. Or you can work through your own wound in this way and recognize this is something you can always, always come back to. Doing this work now and literally writing this, what is the thought? Yeah. And I can't tell you, like in that moment, it was life-saving for me because I was so, so upset and I could not seem to calm myself down because like my inner child, literally, they say inner child, like this was literally little Gervais was screaming for survival. I'm not a bad person. I didn't do this thing you're accusing of me of. I'm not a bad person. And I hadn't like been there in a really long time. Like I hadn't had that kind of an interaction with my mom in a really, really long time. And so mothering myself was my best option and it was transformational in that moment. And anybody can do this. And it actually reminds me like just a couple weeks ago, my 6-year-old was holding the baby and she's like doing such a good job, but the baby fell backwards, like out of her arms because he's kind of top heavy, got a big head, and he fell. And she was sitting on the couch and his head hit the floor and then his body. And I screamed I was like, my baby's dead. Like, of course, it's just where I went. And I was so upset. And I went and I grabbed him and I was hysterically crying. And I just like needed a minute. I just like took him away. He ended up being totally fine. And I knew even as I was working through my own shit, I was like, oh God, you're making an imprint on your child right now. She is going to be traumatized by this moment. You got to step in. You got to fix it. But you have an opportunity to fix this moment because this is going to be emblazoned in her memory as like the time she fucked up and prove that she could not she was a bad person who hurt her sibling, right? And so after I had calmed down, I called my daughter into the other room and I was like, come here. And I gave her a hug and I just said to her the thing that I think I would need to hear in that moment. And I said, you are such a good big sister. You would never hurt your brother on purpose. I know that was an accident. You are such a good person. You are such a good big sister. You are such a good big sister. You're such a good big sister. Because I did not want her to internalize that experience, because you don't know, like when you're young, the weird triggers and wounds that happen when you're young, they don't need to make sense. Like we're all going to F up our kids in some way or another without meaning to. But the best thing we can do is be as aware as possible and as resourced as possible in how it works, right? And taking care of our own mental health, our own well-being, like our own healing from past issues, so we don't perpetuate that cycle with our kids. So again, that idea of mothering yourself is just recognize, like, what would you say to your child if they were curled up in the fetal position, inconsolable right now? And what is the thought and what is the thing that you needed to hear from your mother that it's not going to happen? You can't control another person. You can't make them validate you. You can't make them see that you're a good person. You know, I see this with wives and their husbands all of the time. Like, he needs to do this and say this. It's like, it's not going to happen because you can't control him. So you're going to have to find ways to gift those moments of healing, those opportunities to yourself. And as cheesy as it can sound sometimes, like if you're really in the middle of like a deep triggering wounding experience, this is a tool that you can use, and you can just remember, wait a minute, I want this from somebody else and I can't get it. It's not available to me. My mom and I had hung up. She lives in New Jersey. She was never going to call me back and apologize. So I need to give that to myself. I need to heal that wound for myself. What is the thought that is making this so painful? What do I need to hear? And then literally say the words out loud to yourself. Fuck, I hate those moments. Yeah, okay. I hear you. Me too. Okay. Let me know how that goes. Give me like some comments if you have experienced something like this, or if you would add anything to it, because everybody's self-mothering looks differently. But I so badly don't want to be the type of leader or coach that just like drops these, ideas of like, mother yourself, and then doesn't follow through by showing you exactly how to apply that in your life, or giving you an example of how I'm actually doing this work on myself, because that's not helpful. There's like enough like spiritual leaders out there that are like, look, I'm perfect, it's shiny, and you just change your thought. It's like, I want to actually show you how, and hold me accountable if I ever do share something and don't tell you how. Just ask, because sometimes you're so close to a thing, like in the call today, that virtual Corona edition of the Champagne Society that we just hosted, where I said it and I was like, oh, I just forget. You just forget. That was 4 years ago that I did that I worked through that process on myself. And that had been like the first time I really successfully mothered myself. I forget it's not mainstream. So let's make it mainstream. Okay. Happy Friday. Much love. Ciao.